Hi everybody, welcome back. So today's tutorial is specifically looking at the introduction to thematic analysis for King Lear. And my goal in this tutorial is to look at the ways we could analyze themes, but not to give you all the answers. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, we are working towards being independent and flexible in our understanding of the play so that we can attack any question that we're given and feel confident that we can manipulate the construction of questions, the content that we're being asked to focus on, and the synonyms we know for the words that are included in the question to build scope and nuance in our language and in our answer. What we're ultimately looking to write is confident, unique essays that highlight what it is that we know about the play, and demonstrating specifically and explicitly our understanding of the constructiveness of the play. So how it is that stylistic devices and aesthetic features are put together to construct this version of the characterization of madness, or this version of the characterization of hubris, and how the audience is positioned to view that. So essentially, I'm going to show you a little bit about how we can analyze a theme, the way that a theme is developed across the course of a play. But I'm not going to give you every possible answer, because the reality is it's important that you make those connections for yourself. So essentially, using the subversion of natural order as an example in this tutorial, I'm going to do some thematic analysis and some analysis of the vehicles of thematic development. And you can then go away and annotate your copy of the text to find those connections and to make, to build your evaluation of the way you think audiences are positioned to view particular themes. All right, so let us start. Okay, so just to reiterate, we can't find a theme in a text in the same way that we can a character. So unlike characters, you know, where we can feel sometimes like we can act out their story, we can't find a theme and act it out or circle it with quite the same ease that we can a character. And that is fundamentally because themes are such big ideas. So when we're looking at the big ideas of a play, we need to identify that there are vehicles that carry those particular themes through a whole story. And the significance of those particular vehicles is something that you can analyze. So if a character does it more than a motif does, or vice versa. The ultimate outcome for a character in terms of that theme is positioning the audience to learn something about the theme. And you as a student of literature and you as a student of a literary text are encouraged to connect the dots. So connect a big idea like a theme to its vehicle, characterization, and what that might say about values, attitudes, and beliefs, and how the audience is positioned. So some of the vehicles that you will see used to develop any theme. So, you know, one character can actually be a vehicle for multiple themes. And as a result, one set of lines from that character can be used as evidence for multiple themes. When we look at the vehicles of thematic analysis, we are, of course, talking about our characters. And even though both of the plays being studied by Year 12 students have as the main character, have as the title character, the main character of the play, we don't ever look at characters in isolation, because in society, we don't exist in isolation. So when we're thinking about the way that we can analyze a theme, it's important to not only look at a character by themselves, but also how they interact with other characters. So who are they in a relationship, are in relationships with? So in the case of King Lear, how would you characterize his relationship with his three daughters, with Kent, with his fool? Conversely, or comparably, how could you characterize the relationship between Gloucester and Edmund and Edgar? How could you characterize the relationship between Lear and Gloucester, and then Edmund, Edgar, and Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia? Does it matter that one of those fathers has two boys and the other one has three girls? Does that matter? And if so, what would you like to suggest about that? Consider also, when you're thinking about characterization, how the character changes, when they change, why they change, and what ultimately happens to them as a result of that. So it's okay if a character changes at any point in a story. We need to be able to just talk about the significance of that change as part of the overarching plot, and ultimately what that change suggests about how the audience is positioned to see that theme. We can, of course, consider the effect of plot points. Now, in King Lear, it is absolutely vital that we consider at least one plot point when we look at what ultimately happens in this play. The reality is the division of the kingdom is central to the story. And if I'm going to use the subversion of natural order as an example today, then the division of the kingdom is the catalyst for the subversion of order in the world of King Lear. It is an unnatural action. It is preceded by Kent and Gloucester talking about the fact that they thought that Albany was the favoured son, but now it appears we like Cornwall just as well, so we're going to kind of divide the kingdom and, you know, see what happens there. They're unaffected, they're apathetic about it. So everything about the setup for Act 1, Scene 1 is problematic, and we know that that plot point then is directly significant to the subversion of order as an idea, and then specifically positions the audience to form an opinion about what the subversion of order does to us as individuals and as society. We can consider the use of motifs. So how often do they reoccur? In what context do they reoccur? Who gives them significance? And what do they say about some bigger ideas? So when we think about something like sightedness, how does sightedness or blindness recur as a motif in King Lear? And what does that suggest about natural order and the subversion of natural order when it takes blindness to see clearly? Symbols attached to motifs is the idea of a symbol, which is also a recurring idea, but this one has greater power attached to it than just the literal meanings of the words. So this could be something like the symbolism of the fool, which we see have greater significance once Lear and the fool seem to sort of change roles. We could look at the symbolism of reference to the celestial bodies and to the gods. And our goal there would be thinking again about how it is that these symbols help to position audiences to form an opinion about a big idea like subversion of natural order. And finally, I've just put this one in. We don't have a prologue or an epilogue in this play, insofar as we do not have a piece of exposition where a character who's not really a character directly addresses the audience about what you're going to see or what you have seen and what you should take from it. But we have a character who does something of the same job, and that's the fool. The fool's words, while sounding like nonsense and while certainly being a challenge for an actor to deliver, actually reveal a great deal of truth. And the truth is expressed clearly enough that even around the nonsense words, an audience would understand that Lear shows foolishness by dividing his kingdom, that Lear is old without being wise, that Lear has allowed the association of being king to matter more than ruling and leading his people. Okay, so those are the vehicles that we could use to explore big ideas, big themes, and that means that you could make an argument about the ways in which a theme is presented, where one of your arguments focuses on characterization and a different one focuses on a motif or a symbol. And of course, because we are also able to explore aesthetic features, we could specifically make a third argument around the use of a language device or a literary device and how it is used and manipulated to position audiences. Okay, so if we were going to use the subversion of natural order as an example, then the first of the vehicles that we could explore, of course, is characterization, and the first of the characters is, of course, King Lear. But King Lear is so important because it's the juxtaposition of him against other characters that allows us to really see the subversion of natural order. I think the point made by Harold Bloom in his book about the fact that Lear's story starts when Lear is off stage in a conversation between two old men who then engage a young man in a conversation by focusing on the fact that he is a bastard. So the very first scene of our play dismisses King Lear and focuses instead on the second-born bastard son of Gloucester, as a prelude to then Lear dividing his kingdom. So from the very outset of Lear entering the stage, we see and we hear in his language choices a subversion of order. He says at the start of his address, we shall express our darker purpose. So why choose the words darker purpose if this is something that you are reconciled to, that you feel good about? If other than to suggest that what I'm about to actually offer is a point of competition, you're going to vie for my affections, and in my final act of arrogance or hubris, I will decide based on what you've got to say who gets more of the kingdom, and then divides it in half anyway. So it is our darker purpose, 'tis our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, and then unburdened crawl towards death. And that's in opposition to what he says later, I shall retain the name and all the addition to the king. So I'm going to still be called king. You're still going to show me deference. I'm still going to, earn money. I'm still going to keep a retinue, but I don't want to do any of the hard work. So that is a real subversion of the expectations of a king. It would be expected that if you wear the rank, you do the work. The fool then adds to this characterization in Act 1, Scene 4. So remember that the characterization of Lear doesn't just have to come through Lear's words. It can come through what other characters have to say about him as well. And the fool says, thou had little wit in thy bald crown when they gavest thy golden one away. So you had very little inside here, very little wit inside here when you gave away your crown. And certainly for an audience, so the fool, remember, is supposed to be nonsense, but an audience can clearly understand that. It doesn't show a great deal of sense to give your golden crown away. Later in the same scene, Lear refers, admittedly, he's being a little bit passive aggressive, but he says, this is not Lear. Does Lear walk thus, speak thus? But what he's actually highlighting is the lack of deference shown already by Regan by Goneril is noteworthy because Lear, capital L Lear, the king, is used to being treated a certain way. So this can't be Lear. This must be Lear's shadow if people are showing so little respect and deference to him. So in just the course of Act 1, we see Lear going from all powerful, and one assumes at some point a good, kind, benevolent, successful king, to a man who's divested himself of his cares with the expectation of keeping his privileges, and realizing very quickly that with the separation of himself from his authority, he has also lost the ability to actually control anything. And that is the start of his downward trajectory, which ultimately ends in his madness, because not only do we subvert the natural order of him in his authority as a king, but then in his authority as a father, and the daughters who cast him cruelly into the storm at the end of Act 2, and ultimately the subversion of him as a human being. And I often use the word untethering. So by the end of Act 3, Lear is untethered from the anchor that gives the anchors that give his life a meaning. So he's untethered from being king and all that means. He's untethered from being a father. 2 of his daughters don't recognize him as father, and the 3rd one he's banished. And he's untethered from being a man. He's out in a storm, cold, old, confused, hanging out with a fool, someone pretending to be mad, and one of his friends who's in disguise, and then soon a blind man. It is this reiteration of a whole lot of confusing, nonsensical characters who reinforce this idea that the world is on its head. Okay, so we know that we could explore the subversion of natural order through King Lear, but there's actually like a suite of characters in this story, and any 2 of them viewed in juxtaposition will probably let you explore subversion of natural order. Some of them are natural foils for each other, so Edmund and Edgar, Cordelia and her sisters, but some of them simply offer a wonderful juxtaposition. And so the second character that I have just analysed, simply because he offers a different view, is Edmund. Now, Edmund is almost the embodiment of the subversion of natural order, because he commands so much more power than his name, than his position should allow him. He's smart and capable and resourceful, despite the fact he's a bastard. He's desperate to overcome the illegitimacy that's sort of landed on him, and is really goal-oriented in doing that. I will separate my brother from my father. I will take my father's name. I will then ultimately take it all. I'll become the king, and who knows what he might have achieved if he'd gotten that far. And it's interesting when we look at the subversion of natural order to look at the conversations between Edmund and Gloucester, and then Edmund and Edgar, and the way that Edmund subverts language to refer to the other character. So in conversation with his father, Edmund refers to Edgar as a monster, something that he is most decidedly not, but Edmund is. And conversely, Gloucester refers to Edgar in that same conversation as a villain. And we know that Edgar is not remotely villainous. We then see from Gloucester a wonderful example of dramatic irony, where at the end of Act 1, Scene 2, he actually uses the language of the subversion of the natural world, eclipses, the sky falling down, storms raging, to reveal how it feels to have a son who doesn't respect you. And then Edmund mirrors that very language later in the same scene when Gloucester has departed and Edgar comes on stage, and he talks about the destruction of the family unit because apparently Gloucester wants to kill Edgar. So the actual idea of the subversion of natural order plays out really well simply by focusing on the Gloucester storyline, and the fact that Gloucester as a character is then ultimately rendered blind, and through being blind learns to see more clearly, is a great example of what it actually takes to restore natural order after it's been subverted. But you can look at any of the characters, and I think it's really important to look at them in opposition and in contrast to each other. Because we, as literature students, though, would never just look at characterization, we have so many other tools at our disposal, we would, of course, explore the concept of pathetic fallacy, which is depicted so beautifully for us in Act 3. And really, you could take almost anything from Act 3 as part of the pathetic fallacy, but we know it's specifically the storm. So these are just a few lines. That idea of the bidding the wind to blow the earth into the sea, that's problematic. We all live there, so we really shouldn't do that if we want to survive. So do we want to survive or not? Blow hurricanes and crack your cheeks, so blow so hard that the actual storm itself is going to destroy itself. Rage, blow, you sulphurous and thought-executing fires. Vaunt couriers of oak, cleaving thunderbolts. So thunderbolts hard enough to cut oak trees in half. All shaking thunder. So we get that idea. And then in Act 3, Scene 4, Lear actually says, "This tempest in my mind doth from my senses take all feeling, else what beats there." So having already established the ferocity of this storm, and we understand from those strange little short scenes in Act 3 the confusion experienced by the characters, because we're kind of feeling it too. We actually have Lear explain that the tempest that is raging in the world is mirrored by the tempest in his mind as a result of the confusion he feels for the lack of loyalty from his daughters, from him misjudging Cordelia, and mistrusting the people around him. Okay, so we know as literature students that we can do a lot more with the theme of subversion of natural order. Ultimately, there would be more highlighting in my King Lear for the subversion and then the restoration of natural order than any other theme. So virtually every page in my book has something to do with that idea. What we would have to be able to do with the idea of the subversion of natural order is understand how we as an audience are positioned to view First of all, the subversion, and then we would have to be able to recognize what did it take to restore natural order and what should we as readers take from that idea. Okay, so very, very short introduction. We have lots of themes to explore and lots of different ways to explore them. So don't stress, I will unpack different literary devices and different ways of exploring the vehicles of thematic analysis as I go through the other themes. But until next time, see you later.